See, here we go. And there we are live. January 13th, Ryan Ray alongside Chris Fenton, Feed the Dragon Show podcast, which you can find live on Twitter at Ryan Ray Sr. is where we publish this at on Twitter. And then, of course, the podcast can be found on Spotify, iTunes, wherever good podcasts are found. I think we're even in the Indian market now. So for our Indian listeners, you can get the podcast there. Chris, it is good to see you this Wednesday. How is it in sunny California?
Yeah, it's great, but it's, it's surreal like everywhere else. I mean, I think we're all processing what happened the other day. I think it's really difficult to digest. I have two kids that are almost 14 years old, and they have all kinds of questions, and you're trying to figure out how you explain what they saw, what they're hearing through their friends, what their friends' parents are saying. It's a really interesting sort of quagmire of confusion, ambiguity, horror, frustration, anger, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, out here in sunny Southern California, the weather makes it a little easier to sort of process it all, but it still doesn't make the complexity of what just happened in the United States of America any easier to digest. And then all the meanwhile, we have China doing all kinds of stuff too that I'm trying to keep a close eye on and stay in the lane of, but it's hard to, separate, let's talk about China all the time when we have these issues in the United States, which we're both a part of and both very big patriots of.
Yeah, and just so we know, if you are watching the live stream, comments are welcome, or if you catch the show later and you want to reach out, I know my DMs are open on my Chris's, but you can find us on Twitter, at least there, and shoot us a note. We love the back and forth. This is not a platform for Chris not to just talk and talk and talk. We want feedback, so feel free to weigh in on these discussions. So you mentioned real quick, we got 4 to 5 inches of snow on Sunday over here in Texas, so it was very nice. It was a nice weekend. The kids got to play in the snow. It's just cold. It's not snowy, and so so there it is. There's been a lot of rhetoric since last Wednesday. Obviously, everyone knows what happened then, and everyone's trying to grip it. And I've had some of the best conversations, and I think I put this in the newsletter yesterday. I've had some of the best conversations about our country and what's going on with folks. Me and you haven't spoken a lot offline. Most of the conversations people see is right here. So we're kind of getting it. And what I've told people is every time I talk to someone, my perspective changes a little bit. I nuance a little bit more. I hear something different. I'm like, okay, I haven't thought about that. And I think that's an important thing that we all need to realize is because from DC, what I'm hearing is no, we can't do this. We can't do this. It's like, no. Okay, we need to step back and we need to have these conversations. These are important. Listen, no one's infallible on predictions, just so we're clear. And no one's infallible on predicting the future, whatever it's politics or sports or whatever. So the rhetoric of we can't talk, I think, is not what we want on this show. And so I think it's a good time for me and you to kind of step back and say, well, where are we at in this process? And listen, Ryan Ray may change his position tomorrow or next week because I'm trying to hear and understand and see what I got right and what I got wrong. So Chris, with that, and then we'll tap to China, obviously. As a week out, where are you at?
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to digest it all. I'm really making a concerted effort to try to take all perspectives into play into my brain space. I definitely don't know the right answers, and I don't want people to agree with what I have to say. I'm still trying to process it and know exactly where my point of view is. But this morning in the shower, I was thinking to myself, well, wait, whenever I got super in the nuance of the complexity of any sort of situation, I always tried to go back to the KISS principle, right? The keep it simple, stupid principle. And in China, that's a fantastic way to try to process things because there's just so much nuance to that country and so much you'll never understand that to go all the way back to the outside of the onion and look at that top level peel is the best way to do it. So one of the things I tried to do was think about, okay, if we applied what happened on Wednesday and the reaction thereafter to high school, what would that be? And I was actually listening to Scott Galloway on the Pivot podcast this morning, and he talked about how social media is sort of an enabler of, this idea that they were driving drunk for, years, and they just kept doing it. No one ever accosted them about it. No one arrested them for it. And then suddenly they end up in a fiery crash. And now everybody's saying, oh, it was terrible that they were allowed to drive drunk all these years, right? In the same way, you could apply that to high school, right? I don't know about you, but I would imagine most big high schools like I went to, which was sort of a John Hughesian school in Middle Connecticut, we had a handful of kids that were always drunk at the parties and always the life of the parties and always do crazy stuff, jump jumping off of, rooftops into the swimming pool, or out at the quarry. They jump 100 feet into this water that you had no idea how deep it was. And they were always doing crazy stuff. And it created the life of the party. It created people, laughing and giggling and, having fun. But everybody knew sort of one day they were going to overstep the bounds. And in fact, they were drinking and driving all the time. And obviously that was much more common back then in a weird way. But you just knew something was going to happen. And eventually it did. I remember a group of those kids died in a fiery crash, and it was the saddest day in that high school. I was a freshman and they were in senior year, and everybody suddenly distanced themselves from it. They were like, oh, it was only a matter of time. I can't believe they would do that stuff. They were always drinking and driving, whatever it was. And it reminds me of the way social media execs are talking about what happened on Wednesday, the way leaders are talking about it on Wednesday, and the way corporate leaders are talking about it. And they're all trying to distance themselves from the fact that we all knew something was brewing. We all knew there was a lot of discontent in the country. I don't think we expected the terrible atrocity that happened on Wednesday to happen the way it did, but we knew that there was this fostering of anger and frustration that was going to lead to something someday. We had no idea the size and scope of it or how terrifying it would be, but that was Wednesday. Okay. I now look at that and I go, okay, we had a lot of enablers along the way. They're all trying to distance themselves, and they're all trying to say, oh, you know what? I can't deal with this anymore. I'm not donating anymore. I'm shutting down, Parler. I'm shutting down Twitter, whatever it is, right? And now I bring it to the lane that I understand, which is China. And I think the same thing. I think there's a lot of squeaky wheels over the last 10 years talking about social media, a lot of squeaky wheels talking about how the people that aren't being taken care of, the people that are left behind in the system, are getting angrier and angrier. They're finding places to be able to community and work together to create whatever terrible things that they want to do in order to, vent their frustration, vent their anger, whatever it was. And we're doing the same thing with China. There's squeaky wheels like us. There's squeaky wheels everywhere, where we know everybody that's engaged with China knows that we cannot continue down the same path and continue in America the way we have and the way we feel was God given to us. Like, we know that we are selling the future out of America for short-term gains, for short-term benefits, rewards that are going to haunt us down the road. We all know that there's so much money involved. So my question is, what's the fiery crash that happens in that instance, where we all know we're heading there and it is going to be a fiery crash? What is that? Is it Taiwan being taken over? Is it our reserve currency disappearing off the face of the earth? Is it our ability to lead the world to be completely vanquished in return for China's prominence in the world? What is that fiery crash? Because we are heading towards it, and we need to address it the same way we should have addressed what was going to happen on Wednesday years before. And just to distance yourself from it as an enabler is not a solution. It just adds to the problem. We need to figure out how to fix things and address things that we see are coming down the line, and we're all obvious to.
Okay, so let's back up here to what happened last Wednesday, just so I'm following along here. Are you saying that, because this has been part of my frustration, is that, and I wrote about this yesterday, the day before in the newsletter, is that, yeah, I think it was yesterday. Okay, so are you saying, because there's been a lot of people on the left like, yeah, see, I told you, see, I told you, see, I told you, Trump supporters were always going to do this. Is that are you making that same argument? Or are you saying culturally in the U.S. that this problem has been festering, and we've seen that, whether it was with last year with those protests, and then now it's kind of taken it to a new level? Are you lumping them all together? Are you kind of separate them, or how are you parsing that out before I respond?
This has nothing to do, in my mind, with Trump supporters. I mean, Donald Trump is a symptom to a cold. This is about the cold itself. This is about knowing that at some point we were going to have the type of riots that we had over the summer, the kind of unrest that we had on Wednesday. We have a system that's not benefiting the masses of the United States of America. They're angry. They're frustrated. Our leaders haven't addressed it. Our corporate leaders surely haven't addressed it. And social media has just been inflaming it.
Okay. Okay. So if you're saying it's a broad problem, then yes, I agree. Because that's been part of my frustration is that that it's been targeted very narrowly. Which listen, there's some responsibility. I want to tease that out. I don't want to ignore that, but it's very much a targeted thing. Very instead of what you're trying to, which is address this larger festering of the problem. Which so we're all clear. That's how Trump got in. Is that everyone was frustrated 4 years ago. That's what got him in. And some of the things you're talking about with China is what led to that frustration. And so.
And by the way, it's how Bernie Sanders would have gotten in too, possibly.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. So yes, so on there we are in agreement. I think the thing when you look at it, you say, how did we get here? Which was kind of denial of reality. And when I go back to a few months ago, there was some frustration from the German business community. They were like, hey, we're being screwed on these deals with China. And I don't want to get into all what's going on with Germany and China, but I remember going, okay, that's interesting. The German business community is pushing back on the EU and Germany, saying, hey, you got to restructure the deal with Germany. Now we've seen that the EU and Germany are striking into with China. It's like, okay, is this deal actually going to benefit the middle class, or is it going to be perpetuating more of the same? And that's the problem that we have, is that we say, here's a problem. People are frustrated. Oh, we're going to double down on something that's basically what we did before. We're going to tweak it a little bit. And, I point this out to people. Me and you and average Americans have to understand that the system does benefit certain people, and it doesn't behoove them to change it to benefit everyone. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just how it works. That's just how society works. And so whether it's in China, the US, or Germany, or wherever. And so when you go to China, you look at what's going on there, you're right. There's no one that I know of as a China commentator who doesn't think that something has to change. We might disagree with what, but it is a problem. And much like the frustrations in the U.S., which were, hey, people aren't getting wages, the wealth gap disparity, all this stuff, led to Bernie, led to Trump. A lot of that is because of how we structured our deals with foreign countries over the past 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah, I mean, look, money is so influential in society today in America. I'd like to believe it hasn't been that way throughout our history. I might be naive to that, but it does seem to have a predominance today that didn't exist many years ago, at least at this level. And I look at corporations that yesterday have come out and announced, well, we are simply not going to donate any more enabled this, or even to the government itself. Like some of them are just upset at leaders overall, but most of them are saying people that enabled this, in Congress or in the administration, whatever it was, we're not going to hire any of those people. We refuse to actually help anybody that's enabled any of this to happen over the last 6 years. And I look at that and I go, wow, that's an admission of guilt. You're essentially saying that none of us were idiots. We knew that the system was not working for a lot of people, whether that's right or left, red, blue, right. You name it. It doesn't matter. It's not working. And everybody that has influence in how this country is run just wanted the status quo because they're making so much money. There's reasons that very liberal, I guess, organizations. I mean, I saw, for instance, Disney comes out and says, we're not donating anymore. Well, Disney donates to the left and the right just as much because, oh, by the way, stock options or stock or selling and buying our stock, when you're not taxed as much, allows our stock to go up because people want to invest in that versus whatever else. The taxes that come down allow them to have better EBITDA and et cetera, et cetera. So let's donate because we're incentivized by capitalism and money, right? And that is enabling all the other side effects of supporting whatever that entity is that you think led to what happened the other day. And you can reverse the role with conservative companies that are also, supporting, liberal senators or congressmen because there's certain things that they're actually, involved with on the regulatory bodies or whatever it is. And then that leads, to supporting maybe some extremist left behavior, whatever it is. The bottom line is admitting that you're not going to support these candidates anymore without acknowledging the fact that you knew, like we're all intelligent people, we knew the system wasn't working. We knew there was frustration. We knew there was anger, and you were doing it all along up until now, essentially enabling the drunk drivers. that's an issue and we got to address it. And the fact is, like, it's also admitting that corporate money is really what's driving government too. I mean, it's just a crazy situation. And I think we all need to think as macro as possible and about human instincts and actually bring it back to high school to actually make any sense of it.
Okay. So yes, only thing I would add to that is that some of these companies that I've seen are some of the same companies we talked about on Monday who take off that they're working in Taiwan to please China. And so to me, the problem is that we, as Americans, we're quick to applaud the big corporations, like, oh, they're taking a stand. But then if you go look at how they, with the Taiwan issue specifically, we just talked about that, they're enabling that. They're not helping that. And so they will take off the destination as, they're not going to Taiwan. They will work with the CCP to do that. So I have a hard time believing that the corporations are really trying to do anything of change. They're just simply bending the knee to what we think we want to hear. And I think for me, that's what I like to go back to is we should be skeptical of the motivations. Because as you say, first off, these people understand the inner workings of how all these deals go down far better than me and you do. They're the ones making the deals, influencing legislation. They're doing all that stuff. We're reading about it and analyzing it, but they are the ones who are swaying it. So I have a hard time applauding them, because if you just simply go across the border or across the ocean in this case, you can see that they're not holding those standards anywhere else. And so to me, it's very much a virtue signaling more than anything else. And I'm afraid to say it's a step in the right direction too much, because people then will not realize that their motivations aren't what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, well, I love the Taiwan, the fact that you brought it back to Taiwan, because, like, let's go into our lane on China here. This behavior towards Taiwan from corporate leaders and from our government is essentially the same thing as the kids giving a few more Jello shots to the guy that's about to drive the car with 6 of his buddies, right? In a way, we're saying, oh, corporate leadership, we're not going to recognize Taiwan on our map for the airline that we run or for the hotel chain that we run. Well, in a way, doesn't that enable the CCP to go, oh, corporate America doesn't believe Taiwan is separate from us, so therefore it's a part of us? And the way we've had this ambiguous, really overly complicated, non-relationship relationship with Taiwan was the same thing. It's the CCP going, see, they don't recognize them the same way they recognize Japan or Korea. Taiwan's essentially ours. So when the fiery crash occurs, which is a bunch of PLA ships going across the Taiwan Strait to take Taiwan back into the fold of the PRC, you watch every bit of corporate leaders and corporate, American, government and Congress to the administration to be like, whoa, we got to do something about this. This was terrible. We never saw this coming. I'm going to shut off, the China embassy from Twitter and whatever else. Like, no, we know it's coming. Come on, wake up. It's the same damn thing.
Marriott's going to come out and say, moving forward, we're going to list Taiwan as one of our destinations on our hotel or Delta or whatever. We're going to list them now to show that we stand with them. It's like, no, you're not. You're just afraid that the blowback here in the U.S. would be so severe that if you don't do it, then you will lose shareholders and money and stuff like that. And so to me, that's kind of the I was reading a story. I think it was a Wall Street Journal put out this thing about Americans trust their bosses more than do politicians. And I was talking to a friend about that, and I said I don't really believe that, because here's why. You might trust your boss Ryan works for Bob, and Ryan's a Democrat, let's just say for this case, and Pelosi says something. Most Americans actually respond to what Pelosi says more than our boss, because we presume that Pelosi is a neutral actor, if you will. And so I think that we hear a lot of studies about Americans trusting people that they know more than do politicians, but I don't think we actually live that out. And so what I like to point out when we talk about this hypocrisy is, you can say, okay, yes, they're doing this, but the problem is we get so caught up in cheering them that we don't actually look to see if they're living out what they're saying. So you're mad at the Republicans, because of what happened last week, and JP Morgan Chase comes out and says, we're not going to do this, da-da-da-da. Okay, well, JP Morgan Chase was trying to get, and I don't know if they succeeded in getting part of it, but they were trying to get Saudi Aramco's IPO just a few years ago. Okay, I have no problem with Aramco, but let's just be honest here. Aramco is not the same as a U.S.-based company, and the standards are not the same in Saudi Arabia as they are in the U.S. And so does JP Morgan Chase really have these morals all of a sudden overnight? No, they don't. And so I think we have to be a little bit more skeptical of what the motivations are. Because when you are, then you can point to these other things like China, like Taiwan, and say, well, why aren't you doing that here? Because then you start doing it there. Then we at least might start to believe that you're halfway behind these things that you're pushing.
Well, look, I saw a similar article. I think it was in Axios about how corporate CEOs are more trusted than the leaders of our country. And I mean, let's face it, there's very smart corporate CEOs that are essentially the Michael Jordans of their space. So yes, they're very intelligent and they know what they're doing a lot of the times, and some of them don't, right? But let's go back to the outside of the onion here and ask yourself, why don't you trust leaders in this country? Well, it's not because the leaders are leading. I actually think they're following who influences them, right? And who influences them? It's the corporate leaders that decide where to spend the money supporting the different candidates and the different people that are actually in leadership positions. All leadership is following where their influence is, right? So I would argue, well, if you trust corporate CEOs, then you should, trust Congress, because Congress is just taking orders from corporate CEOs. So the fact that, corporate CEOs are going, oh, we can't donate to this anymore. Well, they enabled leadership, or some of these people that took really crazy positions on things, to do certain things because they were essentially the benefactors that allowed them into office in the first place, and are the benefactors that will allow them to be reelected down the road. It's the tail wagging the dog. It's not the dog wagging the tail.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I think you're right. I think that's for average Americans, and maybe Chris, you can pull the curtain back here on some of how you've seen stuff in China. So, I mean, if today I wanted to go get a movie, just say I have money and I shot a film and it was halfway decent, and I said, you know what, I want to go put that film in China. How much government dealings would have to happen to get that pulled off?
Oh, well, it's the whole thing to pull off is all government dealing. You have to. I mean, and the government is going to look at the movie and go, how does it help, our cause to keep 1.4 billion people just happy enough that they don't revolt? That's always the way I look at the outside of the onion. And if it's not something that plays into that, then you're never going to get the movie in. Or if it's something they think their populace might want to see, and it actually helps, mitigate, certain strife because it hits some themes or whatever, they'll just let it into the black market. You'll never monetize it, but they'll let some of their populace see it through that means. But you don't get into that market without full government compliance and full government approval.
So when you look at Disney or the other people who are putting movies out there, we had to first realize outside the onion that they are one-to-one dealing with the government. Now let's take it in the U.S., because we talked about this with the Mulan stuff. At the end of the credits, you'll see, thanks to the state of Georgia, thanks to this city, how much, not for maybe an independent film, but a big budget film, is there work with government, either from tax credits, for locations to shoot on, security? I don't know. I'm asking out of ignorance. How much government overlap is there in the U.S. with the movie industry?
Oh, there's so much. I mean, and by the way, it's not the United States of America when it comes to making a movie at all. Every state is trying to outdo the other with more subsidies, more tax breaks, rebates, whatever it is. It's crazy. And on top of it, there's a whole infrastructure of different third parties that have gotten around it, almost like lobbyists inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C., where a studio will use different agents or third party administrators to figure out how to get that rebate, how to get this, how to get that, where to shoot. The location scouting is all intertwined with it. It's 100%. I mean, there's big money on the line. If you're shooting a, say, $200 million movie, you could save $50 million, right? A quarter of the budget by shooting in Atlanta versus in Los Angeles, mainly because Georgia is just trying and working really hard to outdo anything that California does to keep production here.
Okay. And thank you for that. That's wonderful. So now when we talk about the overlap between there we go, the private business and government, in China, there is none. And then in the U.S., you're saying that maybe instead of here, it's here. It's basically neck and neck to get a big budget film done. And so when you talk about big business saying, well, we're not going to donate to your campaign anymore, let's not pretend that has nothing to do with all the other things that you just listed off there, tax credits and stuff like this. So, and just if you're a congressman, a regional congressman, not a state senator, and Bob Iger calls you up and says, hey, listen, we'll go film in your county or your district or whatever. we'll bring jobs and we'll do this. Those are the things that happen on some level. I don't know how they work themselves out through a lobbyist directly, whatever. So thank you for that. Because I think that a lot of people, they think, well, Hollywood has shot a movie and that's great. And they don't realize all of the behind the scenes stuff that has to happen just to get the film budgeted and not budgeted, but produced. And there's a lot of government workings that go on with that.
Look, I'm going to stay nonpartisan on this, but like if you just look at the same behavior that you're talking about and apply it to politics, the same calculus goes on with Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell or whatever in regards to how they ardently support everything that the Trump administration does up until like a week ago, and then decides, abandon ship after Wednesday, right? Like there were a lot of things that they benefited from by holding firm and supporting the president through thick and thin, through all kinds of craziness and all kinds of stuff that was criticized and whatever it was, right? But then one day, Wednesday was sort of the day, they woke up and they go, here's my opportunity now. Those Trump supporters that put me in office, kept me in office, will keep me in office, suddenly may be abandoning the Trump train. So now I can abandon that and move away from it because I'm safe. The same way corporate America is going, well, you know what? Now we brought in a lot of new people in Congress, there's this and that going on. And now I can say and make this big stance that I'm going to do something that's right because I'm protected financially, I'm protected regulatory wise, I'm protected policy wise to do it right now at this moment. And that to me is just, unfortunately, not leadership. It's just not.
Oh. And just real quick on the thing from last Wednesday, the frustration for me on last Wednesday before the rally, was I had people reaching out to me like, hey, what do you think's gonna happen? What do you think's gonna happen? And I would just tell them, go listen to Ted Cruz, go listen to Hallie. When they're actually pressed on what they hope the outcome might be or what they're expecting for, none of them are saying that Trump's going to get another term. Cruz is pushing for a 10-day examination, which is a terrible idea. We can talk about another time. And then they would say, well, what do you think the likelihood of you even getting that is? He goes, basically none. So if you actually listen to the politicians when they're pressed, they weren't expecting anything to happen either, other than what ultimately did happen, which was Biden became officially presidential election, whatever the proper term is. And so, to your point, to see now folks bailing, it's like, well, you didn't believe this narrative going into before last Wednesday. Then we have this terrible event. And then now you're bailing. It's like, well, I didn't believe you last Tuesday. You think I believe you this Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever it is, that now you've had a change of heart. No, you're trying to get reelected. You're trying to stay in office. And so you're just kind of going wherever the wind goes. I mean, look at, Lindsey Graham. Good God. He's daily flipping his position, it seems like. And that's I'm an equal opportunity hater. I don't like you. I'm a libertarian. I don't vote for either party, so I'm not trying to take a side like you.
Yeah, well, I'm an equal opportunity uniter, I guess. Like I'd like to see this country come out of this as a unified front somehow. I would like to think our darkest days are behind us. I'm cautiously optimistic, I guess, in a pessimist kind of way, but if you look at the sad part about it is that when politicians like Cruz or Hawley try to thread that needle of, supporting the Constitution, doing what is probably legally an impossible task, yet also look like they're towing that Trump support or that Trump supporter support while also having this little bailout side exit, right? That nuance, makes sense to them and makes sense politically for a lot of things in sort of a Dr. Evil kind of way, I guess. But it does make sense to those that are savvy in it. The problem is we have a lot of people, and I'm not saying they're dumb. I'm saying we have a lot of people that aren't focused all the time on politics. They're focused on headlines or focused on tweets or focused on just simple, like direct messages. And the message they got was that the vote was stolen. And if they go and storm the Capitol, and there's no defense whatsoever. I am not playing the victim card whatsoever for these people, but I'm just saying, or for the people that really did terrible criminal acts, they were under almost a snake oil salesman type of pitch that they fell for and they followed through on. And it just plays into all the just terrible sort of leadership issues that we have in this country and the forgotten people on both the right and the left that the system has ignored.
I think that's. I like the way you said that, because if Cruz or Holly or whoever would have come out and said, "Listen, per the Constitution, we have the right to do this, and we're just going to exercise our right because we are concerned." That's one thing. It's like you're stating the facts, but you state the facts in the way in which it was done hypes it up more, and then when you bail on it so quickly, it's like, well, then like, as you say, the problem is that most people aren't political junkies like me and you. They're not watching all this stuff. You can't hear Cruz go, well, yeah, there's probably no shot of this actually happening several times, or Hallie. You can't hear that. And so you see the headlines, you see what they say. And so you get to this point where you're like, oh my God, well, the election was stolen. And, on Wednesday, something's going to happen. It's like, no, nothing was going to happen other than Biden was going to get, if something were to have happened, what we saw Wednesday would have been nothing, right? Like, it would have been really bad because, and so thankfully what happened, regardless of what we think about the election, thankfully what happened Wednesday after all of the nonsense was we're moving forward. And then now if we want to go back and talk about the election being stolen or look into all that stuff, we'll go do it. Go investigate and write reports and books. I'm fine with that. But and so I think that you're very astute to say that most people are watching the headlines, and that's part of the problem. Is there's so much news, it's so hard to keep up with who's saying what. And Trump, for whatever you think about him, he kind of tapped into that ability to tweet out 100 times a day. And, you might catch 2 of his tweets, you might catch 5 of his tweets, you might catch 1 of his tweets, you might catch a headline about his tweet. It's really hard to keep up, and you almost kind of go, well, whatever. I just can't keep up with it. It's too much. And so I think it kind of lets us in a bad spot.
Yeah, and I just think the lesson learned here, to tie this back to China and sort of wrap up the episode, is the fact that I don't think between corporate America, people paying attention in America, the citizens of America, the part of America that the system has let down, which is a large part of our population, social media C-suites, and our government, I don't think any of those people didn't see some sort of a fiery drinking and driving crash coming at some point. I'm hoping Wednesday was it. I'm hoping that was as big as it can be, because obviously there can be bigger. And what happened Wednesday was about as terrible as you can imagine in a lot of different ways. But I will tie it back to China, which is anybody engaged in China, from the capitalistic corporate C-suites to diplomats, to people involved with the United States of America in various leadership positions. We are all aware that going the same course, and I'm asking for Cold War or war, like I always say, but continuing on this same course will lead to a fiery crash. Or maybe even a slow-moving train wreck, which would be even worse, because none of us are going to see it happening, and it's just going to eventually happen, and we'll be like, oh my God, wake up and whatever. In a way, a fiery crash is probably a much better wake-up call. But unfortunately, when that does happen, it will be too late. So we need to start learning from mistakes, not let history repeat, and look at the relationship with China with the same way we had with this relationship or non-relationship with a majority of Americans, whether we're talking about over the summertime or what happened on Wednesday. And I'm not saying they're exactly the same by any stretch, but I'm just saying those are symptoms of this massive cold that a lot of us knew were there, that was inflamed by social media and various other things, inflamed by rhetoric out of Washington, D.C., essentially inflamed by rhetoric out of some of corporate America too, and by people. So it is something we're all cognizant of, or we're cognizant of, that led to Wednesday. I think the same thing with China. And now we need to actually pay attention to squeaky wheels and start to think and construct a proper path forward with the other superpower on earth.
So, yeah, I'll close with this. Outer layer of the onion, take it to China. Real simple. If you have seen a company who has said they're not going to support political candidates in the U.S., and you know they do business in Taiwan, write them a note and say, put that on your website if it's not. That's simple. That's simple. I mean, you could say we're on the virtue signaling as well. They are, but guess what? The consequences, it takes a little bit more than just cutting off political donations. And so keep it simple. So what do you think, Chris? Agree, disagree?
I 100% agree. The same way I tweeted out the other day this article or this tweet that came from the Chinese embassy, which, by the way, I have some relationships with the people there. But they tweeted out this crazy sort of anecdote about how a Uyghur was saying this is the greatest thing that's happened, this re-education, and how they're putting us to work. Why would I call it forced work, forced labor? I'm like, what are the standards that Twitter has when you're allowing that type of information out from the Chinese embassy, yet you're cutting off, let's face it, there's probably people on Parler that definitely deserve not to lose their voice in whatever they're talking about. I've seen Parler, I've been on there. There's some wacky people. There's definitely some very nonviolent and just strange rhetoric there. There seems to be some common people or normal people. And then there's obviously extremists, right? But just to knock all of them off and then allow something to come from the Chinese embassy like that, I thought that was just sort of a weird aberration of consistent policy.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, folks, again, you can catch the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, wherever good podcasts are found. If for some reason your podcast player won't publish it or it's not there, let me or Chris know, and we'll do what we can to make sure it is published there. Chris, thank you again, as always. And for the listeners, we'll be back. I'm sure we'll probably get one more in this week. Try to get one more in this week, and everyone stay safe out there.
Thanks, everyone.